Welcome back to the Subvert. This is Alex Knight. I am joined by Aaron Stewart.
Hey.
And Kristin Rumohr.
Hello.
If this is the first time you're joining us, thank you very much. This is the podcast where, as we say, you will laugh, loathe, and love on a smattering of different subject material handpicked just for you. And today, what are we talking about? We're talking about, should humans die? I guess I should give a little more detail about what that means.
Well, that's what we're talking about? Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah. Should humans die? So scientists have been, of course, trying to reverse the aging process. So I guess this is a very interesting hypothetical question. Should we, could we, if we could, what does that actually mean for the human race? If we were able to do that, what are the economic impacts of being immortal? And can the planet sustain life?
Well, I mean, it can barely sustain the amount of people we have now, so...
Okay, cool. Well, episode done. We've answered
Jumping
that
right
question.
into it. Problem solved.
Well, see, and that's, there's lots of studies to show that there is enough to go around. We're just really wasteful with it.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And that's kind of the issue that we're facing right now, is that if we could get a hold of, people tossing crap out their windows, we could maybe get a better handle on, having enough for everybody to go around. But
well, sure. I mean, we overproduce now.
Yeah.
And yet still, like a third of the population is still starving whilst we're throwing away tons and tons of food every day, right?
Yeah.
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 The thing is, obviously, like right now, as it stands, like I definitely am afraid of death. I think about death a lot, maybe more so than a lot of people. I don't know about you guys, but if I had the capability, I would absolutely love to live forever. But the problem is, on a wide scale, if suddenly we could do that, if we could reverse the aging process and live forever, as people tend to do, they procreate, they have children, and you can't just keep adding bodies to the planet because we don't have enough food, right? We don't have enough space. So that means what? We colonize different planets, which is obviously, I guess, the next big step in where the human race is going, and we're developing that now, trying to come up with a mission to Mars and colonizing Mars and other planets. But obviously, our technology is still so limited in terms of, well, we don't even really know the long-term effects of space travel on the human body. There's a little bit of data about that now, and that there's ongoing research about that. But we still don't really know because we've never really sent people to another planet to live on for the rest of their lives, right? So if we were, it's an interesting question to think about, right? Because if we were able to come up with a cure for death effectively tomorrow, I think it would be catastrophic. Because we don't have the technology. We don't have warp speed. We don't have the ability to, we haven't found any other planets, at least, that we have the capability of reaching in a reasonable amount of time that we could actually, that could sustain life, that we could colonize.
I also think it's incredibly egotistical and very definitively human of us, right, to feel the entitlement to live forever. Right? Just because we have awareness of death, which is arguably we're the only species that have that, right? But then this idea of, well, we should be able to live forever and we should manipulate nature essentially above all other creatures that naturally will die, right? So by us, I think, continuing to live forever and to continue populating and procreating, it would naturally, we would just kind of weed out the other species, right? They'd have to make room for us. That's just how it works.
Which is, I mean, it's arguably what's been going on right now.
Well,
right?
yeah, definitely.
I mean, we've been making these advances. There's no other species on the planet that could have possibly done this, right? As it stands right now. So, I mean, we may wipe each other out in the near future here and something else may rise up in our place. But as it stands right now, the only ones that actually have a chance of achieving immortality due to, things we've built around us is us. So, I
think it would be quite boring.
But
I think I'd get very bored living forever.
I can't. I think that's just such a pessimistic and right. Like
I think it's
I'm
like in an
constantly
exciting
amazed
way.
by stuff going on around, right? Like, I mean, yeah, there'd be a certain amount of I've seen this before, but just to watch civilization grow, I think would just be amazing, right?
And you just never get to know what comes next, right? It's a big question mark. It could be an empty void of nothing, but it could be something. It could be a shift to who knows. There could be another dimension or universe or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Right? What if we're in like the crappy stage right now and then you ascend to something better? You'd never know if you lived forever.
Well, and that's the thing. You'd think that a lot of the stuff that we're kind of growing through right now would be, again, part of that growing pains thing that will lead to us being better in the future, right? Mm-hmm. This is our adolescent phase where we're awkward and gangly and knocking stuff over and ruining the planet around us and going, oh, shit, oh, sorry, oh, boy, bumping into stuff and just like twitchy and just, spewing various fluids all over the place without any control and, right, like... well, that's kind of right. Like that's the visceral effect of where we are right now, right? Like when you break it right down to the bare minimum of what we're doing, that's kind of it. We're just blindly flailing about, and hoping that we're going to be able to find some way of transcending this,
yes,
right? This right here, right? Like, And I hold out hope. I try to be optimistic, right? Like I used to be pretty pessimistic about people and just be like, why would I bother talking to them? They're not going to change. They're not going to listen. There's really no point to doing it. It's just a waste of my energy to even bother trying, right? And now I find that as I've gotten older, I just feel like it's incumbent on us to say these things. We're supposed to talk to each other about this stuff. We're supposed to be able to have these conversations with each other and really, move forward on these things. I think that the idea that we can't is what's holding us back.
It absolutely is holding us
back. The idea that it's us against them and that there's no way for us to be able to talk to them because they just believe something different and there's no way that we could ever find any kind of, right? Like I don't believe in that. I think that everyone has a method and there's some way of getting through. There's some, like it's just a matter of we all have to learn what's worth growing towards, I think is what we've lost sight of right
and
now.
That's the entire point of this show, right? Is to have that conversation. And I agree. It's a serious problem. I mean, and the lack of communication and willingness to talk about things that make us uncomfortable and things that we fear. And also the willingness to listen to other people, even though they may believe in things that we don't necessarily agree with, I think is a very healthy thing. And I think we need more of that.
Especially if they don't agree.
Especially if they don't agree.
Right? Like that's the thing. I think we should be seeking out those discussions.
Yes.
And that's my problem. Like I've always considered myself your hard weather friend. I'm the guy that's here when stuff's difficult. Right? Like I'm not a fair weather friend that, is only here when things are great and it's going to be fun, right? Like, yay, butterflies and rainbows all day, every day. Woo, right? Like that's not what life is, right? And I cherish those people who call me up when they have a real issue going down and they need someone to talk to. I love that shit, right? Like that makes me feel like I'm actually helping and moving some part of this, even if it's just this little bit that I might help to move forward a little bit. I love that, right? And I think that that's it's that community sense of, we're all here to help each other out that we're starting to lose sight of. And I don't know if it's capitalism. I don't know if it's, we just have all these things that are kind of put in the way of us seeing each other for the human beings that we all are.
Yeah. Okay? There's a big separation between like us and them right now.
Yeah.
Right. Everyone's out for themselves. Look out for numero uno.
But that's always kind of been the issue, right? Like you look at Darwin, he did the evolution of species. And the one thing that everybody grabs onto is this fucking survival of the fittest thing. Yeah. Despite the fact that it was mentioned once in the book and in a record, another 17 or 18 times, he talks about how it's the cooperation of species that actually drives evolution. Right.
Well, logically, survival of the fittest is community.
But it's just that one little piece of it, right? Where that's nature's way of kind of pruning things out, but it's the cooperation of these species, all these animals working together as a community, right? Like it's the fish that go in a pod that survive, right? Like it's not the individual fish off by itself, it's the pod that survives. And that's the kind of the lesson that I think we need to start learning is that it's only through us that we're going to get anywhere, right? So we need to learn to start talking to us.
Well, definitely. So do you guys think that, let's say the technology was available tomorrow, right? That humans were able to live forever. Do you think it would be very biased at the moment? Do you think it would be only select groups of people would be chosen to receive this to live forever? And if so, how do you choose?
Oh, that is
and that's kind of the issue that we're facing right now, is that you would have, like, even you look at the COVID-19, right? Like, the treatments that people have been receiving vastly differ depending on your status.
Yeah.
Right? Like, Trump goes and gets these experimental antibodies and blah blah blah. Nobody else had access to that stuff, right? Like, and it's just, so it's the same problem with this immortality vaccine, right? Where it would be for the richest and the elites, and those people would get it, and it would possibly start a new, race, technically, of people who would be considered super.
Well, I think
which becomes an issue.
The only way to really fairly do it, I would think, without much argument, would be to have some kind of lottery system where it is just totally pick your name out of a hat and you're going to be the first one to get it. Because I think, look, I mean, like, if it was up to me, I would probably prioritize find the smartest people in the world and give that to them first, because we need those people, the people with the super high IQs, the prodigies, to find cures for cancer, to find breakthrough new technologies that will allow us to free the human race of the existing solar system that we live in, to go far beyond anything that we could possibly comprehend. Those are the people that I want to live forever, at least in the beginning, because we need more of those kinds of people.
I'd have to kind of disagree. I think we need all types, right? If we want to actually continue on and have a human race that, speaks to each other, that's compassionate, that can work together. I think, going back to the idea of the lottery system, therefore you get a cross section of pretty much everyone in society, right? You need the people that arguably don't seem to contribute much, but they contribute in their own way by, forcing other people to then have to, collaborate, talk to each other. So, I think it'd be dangerous to have only people with the highest IQs, because then we would cease to be human.
Exactly. Like, those other people still have a community too. Just because you're not an elite, they're part of us. And that's, I think, the other thing that we've, we tend to treat the mentally ill as other instead of us. That's us. And only through a little tweak of your brain, that could be you. Right? Like, you fall over, you whap your head off of something tomorrow, and now you're them. And you can't, and that's the problem, is that if we start to treat each other as them instead of just us, it's very easy to kind of push them off and not worry about and don't have to deal with this. And then you never get those other ideas coming in from other people who have come through a different, set of circumstances to get to where they are.
But don't you think there are certain people, don't you think there are certain people that just absolutely should not live forever? Like the morons, the low intelligent people that spread misinformation, the people that just...
I draw a line between, stupid and simple. Right?
Okay.
Because I feel that, there's lots to be learned from simple. Right? Like, stupid doesn't want to learn. And I get that. And that's something that we need to start dealing with. Like, ignorance is a problem that we really we're going to have to address moving forward. This fake news thing, if people don't learn to differentiate between what's real and what's not, we're going to have a real problem moving forward here. Right?
But I think if they lived forever, though, they would eventually evolve and start learning.
And that's the thing, right? Like, we've discovered, like, we thought that animals, that their intelligence was far, inferior to ours. And we're now finding that their intelligence is just on a different scale than ours. They're just doing it differently. It doesn't mean that they're less intelligent. I mean, they're less intelligent technically, but they're using their brains in different ways. Right. So the corvids, like ravens and crows, their brains are, a quarter or a tenth the size of ours. And yet they're still able to perform tasks and puzzles and do things that primates with much larger brains are having trouble accomplishing.
Interesting.
that's the problem with intelligence, is that there's no real scale. You can't say that person is stupid, because just because they don't fall onto our scale of what we're using to classify intelligence doesn't mean that they're not
right.
Really smart in other ways.
Do we
like
still use the
savants would be considered, outside of, our intelligence scale, and yet some of them are incredibly, beyond our capabilities on some levels.
Do we still use an IQ test to gauge general intelligence? Because I thought those were not accurate.
Well, they've discovered that a lot of them tended to be sort of somewhat race-based.
Okay.
Right? In that the scores that were achieved depended kind of on where you came from, right? Because it wasn't necessarily how you were dealing with, but a lot of it was kind of, anyway, that's something to go into later. Well, actually, an IQ one would be a great episode to go into, right?
But I think mostly intelligence is based on standardized tests in general, right? The whole education system is standardized.
Yeah.
So can you call that a measure of intelligence? Right. I've met plenty of people that haven't gone to school, and they're intelligent in a very different way, right? They might not be able to spout out facts and write long papers or anything, but in terms of living and being human, they're very smart, so-called street smarts. And that's, we've tended to discredit that.
Yeah. Like a lot of these, geniuses who never graduated high school, right? Who essentially have taught themselves to do what they're doing, right? Like, I read an article about Elon Musk, who apparently learned to become a rocket scientist by hiring rocket scientists and taking their textbooks and going home and reading them.
Yeah, I mean, there are plenty of people that don't have necessarily a traditional educational background. They're just inquisitive, and they just naturally gravitate towards, I'm just going to soak up whatever information I find, and I'm going to constantly be curious about things, and I'm going to read a lot about things. And a lot of people are self-taught. I mean, some of the best, most talented, creative people that I've ever seen or met in my life didn't have a traditional educational background. I'm not dismissing education. I'm not saying that you shouldn't go to university, but I'm just saying we also have to acknowledge that there's plenty of people that are incredibly intelligent in more ways than just one, and maybe in the traditional sense that we classify intelligence. And they don't necessarily have a degree.
Nope. No, definitely. And I mean, the converse is also true as well, isn't it? I've met plenty of people with degrees that are absolute morons.
How many people that you've met with an MBA that are just incompetent?
Yeah.
But that's the thing. It's there's, because you could be good in something, and we all have weaknesses.
Yes.
Right. So
absolutely.
That's the problem, is that, to say that you're a moron because you can't do, long division. Well, maybe that's just not what you, right?
Hey, long division's hard.
Be nice. Be nice. Okay. I told you that. I told you that in private. I thought that was just between you and me.
Well, I do air out this dirty laundry every once in a while. And that's the problem. So, if we can't use intelligence as a scale to determine who's going to be immortal, what do we use? Right? Would maybe empathy be a better scale for something to determine who might be worthy of living forever? Someone who's, going out of their way to care for others.
Well, having consideration for the other people.
Yeah. Right. They're saying that might be one of the, moving forward, that might be one of the emotional things that we should be really pushing towards moving forward. Right. Again, this kind of, sense of community, this empathy for others, this really, fostering this sense of us.
Yes.
How do you think we get that back? Because arguably a lot of people have kind of lost that ability to put themselves in someone else's shoes, to have basic empathy for others. Do you think it's something that can be retaught, or is it something that has to be lived?
Good question.
Ooh. Stumped.
And that's the problem. I'm pretty sure there's no black or white answer for that. It really kind of depends on the person, right? I think that some people, with the intelligence thing, some people may just reject the idea of a traditional education, right? They may be smart enough to take a look at that and go, that's not going to work for me, and do something else. So that might come down to a lot of this too, is just finding different ways of doing this. Maybe. I don't know where I was going with that.
No, I think that makes sense. Here's the other thing, and this is somewhat related to, I don't know if you guys have seen that movie Gattaca. I think it's about 20 years old now. But, with things like, with technology like CRISPR, where we have the ability to splice and edit genes, and hopefully maybe with CRISPR, with that technology, we'll be able to, eradicate crippling diseases that we have today. But, I'm curious with all the gene therapy research that we have now too, like there is that movie Gattaca raises so many moral and ethical questions about, if you have children, who are you to say what color eyes that kid would have, or, if you're able to edit the genes of your child, like it raises all these kinds of questions of like whether or not that is even something you should have, you should have the decision of changing somebody's life based on
well, is it up to us to alter nature?
Right.
But then arguably as well, that's kind of a product of us evolving to this point to be able to make these alterations. I'm
for it in the sense that, like, if we have the ability to edit genes, like if we can pinpoint birth defects before a child is born, and if we can eradicate diseases that severely impact your quality of life, I'm all for it. I think we should do it.
I would argue that we would have to, right? Like you were talking about how if we want to actually get off this planet, we're not going to be able to do it as us. We're going to have to augment ourselves. We're going to have to find some way of dealing with the radiation or the difference in gravity.
Exactly.
We're going to have to start learning how to augment and change our DNA and our RNA in order to, learn to evolve on these other places that we may actually have to start throwing ourselves out to.
That's an important note, actually, because that dovetails nicely into this whole thing about leaving the solar system and about human evolution too, because evolution is such a gradual, like micro step thing that can take millions of years. And with technology, I mean, I'm not going to see it in my lifetime, but I absolutely see that at some point we will be able to control our own destiny, provided that we don't destroy ourselves and blow up the planet, first of all. But I can totally see us finding ways with gene therapy of actually enhancing and speeding up the evolutionary process to make us resilient to all sorts of space radiation, so that, or maybe even allowing us to breathe in all sorts of toxic chemicals that we wouldn't be able to normally, like just adapting us to other different atmospheres on a planet, maybe that would allow us to survive on a lot of different places.
Or even bacterial or viral resistances.
That too.
Right? Like that's where this pandemic might actually help us in the end, because we might be able to start pinpointing those things that we can learn to, the pathways that lead to illness, or those kind of things that we can start to augment us to move forward. And, when we hit these things on another planet that our body has had no access to or whatever before now, we might be able to breed some people who are better adapted to it. And that's where like the immortality vaccine might be better served to the people that we send out into space. Right?
Okay, yeah.
Why not send out people who would live to be 150 and might be able to bring that kind of generational knowledge to a colony on another planet?
Yeah.
There's a thought. Right? Instead of augmenting ourselves so that we can live here and keep on polluting this place, why not send out some superhumans out into space and let them,
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, those are probably the kind of superhuman beings that we probably should send to Mars, not just regular human beings.
Yeah, do you want to send Joe Blow or do you want to send Superman?
Yeah, exactly.
Joe Blow.
Who's going to have a better chance of surviving, right? Like Joe Dirt, I guess. There we go. Yeah.
Just throw them in the mix just for fun.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Just send the mullet out there in space. Mullets in space. I like that, actually. That's actually, we need to do that. Actually, that'll be the next Star Trek, mullets in space.
Yeah. The thing about Mars, like I've always loved science fiction, and the idea of colonizing another planet and traveling to another planet is fascinating to me. But there's nothing particularly interesting to me about Mars. I don't think I would want to spend the rest of my days on a red, hot, desolate planet.
See, and that falls into the, like, oh, I'd be so bored being immortal. I was like, you're only bored if you're boring. Really, if it gets right down to it, right? Like I've got 1 million, I've got 50 books here that I haven't read yet, right? Like I've got all sorts of stuff to occupy my time with. I'm never bored. When I get bored, I go find something to do.
Sure.
Right. So the idea that after 150 years I'd run out of books to read, like, are you kidding me? That doesn't make any sense. Or that people would become less interesting, right? Like, what? They just fixed everything and now everybody's boring. Oh, gee, there's no romantic, bullshit going around. There's no drama to be watched. Like, it just seems crazy to me that's the problem with immortality. I get bored. Well, you're an asshole. Right? Like, I'll find something to do. It's cool. Don't worry.
I don't think I would be bored as an immortal, because I mean, like, are we talking just an immortal, or are we talking about someone like that has like an omnipotent being that could just like Q from Star Trek, just snap his fingers and he could be on like anywhere in the galaxy?
Either way. Right? The idea that a Q would get bored with the universe.
I don't think you could.
Right? Like, you can do anything you want. What do you mean you're bored? Right? Like, yeah.
Yeah, you would, if you were an omnipotent being, you would be able to do anything. I mean, you could watch a star explode.
Yep.
I mean, there would be so many amazing things that you could see and do.
I would suggest that a lot of people who would are worried about becoming bored have issues with being inside their own head. Right? Yeah. That's my problem. Like, being an immortal, I could happily just sit and not talk to someone for 100 years. That'd totally be cool. Right? Like, that's my thing. I just go, I find that the people who need to occupy themselves with something are the ones who would have real issues with being immortal. But I think a lot of us would be totally cool with it.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
And that's where, again, like, if the idea was, I can't live here anymore, you got to send me off into space. Okay. Right. I mean, yeah, I just find there's all sorts of adventures to be had. I haven't done, barely anything on this planet yet, comparatively.
Yeah. I wouldn't mind being able to, like, if I could have the body that I have now and still, like, it would be nice to be able to live another 100 years, just because, like, you'd be able to get so much more done.
And I think that's a lot of people's issue with this whole immortality thing, is that they look at someone who's 90 and go, I don't want to be like that from forever and ever and ever.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's kind of the issue, is that we look at aging.
Right.
And it becomes a bit of an ageist kind of issue where we don't want to be senior.
No, because who wants to become
if we could be immortal, an immortal 20-year-old, sure, why not? That'd be great. Right?
But living forever, you're right, is a decrepit, broken down.
Yeah.
Yeah, nobody wants to be
absolutely be hell. Right?
Nobody wants to be a prisoner of their own body.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. So I mean, there's definitely, pros and cons to the whole to the whole thing, right? I mean, I can never die, or I can never die,
What about the idea of downloaded consciousness?
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Right? If we're not able to find a way to preserve your physical form, but you could potentially draw out consciousness and download that into something else.
There was a great episode, actually, it's my favorite episode of Black Mirror, called San Junipero, and it's totally about that concept. It's about being able to completely capture somebody's life essence, essentially, their who they are as a person, and seamlessly transfer their consciousness into a computer and create an artificial reality that they could control, and it would be as real to you as and whatever, how you perceive reality now, it would feel exactly like that. So there's, in a way, you don't, like, although your physical body may perish, your consciousness lives on, and effectively you are immortal at that point. I think that's interesting. I'd be okay with that.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of evidence to show that that's where we are.
The only way we'd be able to do it, right? Rather than preserving this actual body we're in, I think that would be a pretty difficult thing to maintain. But arguably, I mean, we're just a collection of electrical impulses and neurons at the end of the day. So you find a way to just be able to harness that into, like you're saying, you upload yourself into a USB. I don't know. Right?
Yeah, but
it's just electricity going into something else, and your perception is still exactly the same.
Yeah. The other question that I have is, if we could do that, is it truly a transfer of consciousness, or is that just a copy of who you were? That kind of freaks me out.
Where
when
we
I
get a
think
bit
about
existential, isn't it? Right? Do you actually lose your essence?
Well, yeah, it would technically become a different you, right? Because the experiences of that you would then diverge from your experiences, right? So they would, in essence, become them at that point, right? It would be a completely separate entity, and while they may have, even if everything about you was exactly the same up until that point.
Yes.
You're basically creating a parallel universe at that point where you have two diverging existences. Okay? So, yeah.
Ooh, it's hard to wrap your brain around.
Well, see, and again, like coming back to the idea of that, alternate reality, there's a lot of evidence to show that that's kind of where we are, right? And that the reality that we construct around us actually has all of the hallmarks of a computer simulation. And that this existence that we have here might actually just be us in another reality hooked up to a machine that's projecting this reality into us. And then when we pull the helmet off of that reality, we're left with another reality where we're just actually a person with a helmet on, and we're going, oh my God. And then we're pulling off helmets, and it's just this constant multiverse of me pulling off helmets to become a different what?
Yeah, I don't buy the theory that this is just some kind of grand simulation. I think that's just silly.
I think if there was a definition of God, that would be it.
I suppose.
Isn't that a Buddhist ideal, though, right? Like the universe exists on the shell of a turtle's back.
Right. Because because
I mean, that's where prove it doesn't.
Yeah, from an ant's perspective, an ant looking up at a human being would probably not comprehend anything about.
It's all about perception.
Yeah.
Okay? And that's where, I go back to Richard Feynman had an idea that there was one single electron in the entire universe that only popped up when you needed it to, right? Which I've expanded to the idea that there's technically only one consciousness that infects all of us, and we're basically just experiencing this perception of the consciousness, the universal consciousness at this time, and then I'll leave this body and go into your body back in the time when you were born and experience the consciousness through your eyes, or through a bird's eyes, or through a worm's eyes.
Okay.
And that's where, I feel like at some point I will be you and you will be me. And so I feel that this idea of us having a separate consciousness doesn't really bear true in a lot of ways, right? And that when you kind of get down to it, there is only me and us. Right? There is technically no them, because in reality, the only thing that can be proven to exist is kind of me, right? And the rest of this could be just that projection, or this helmet that I'm wearing right now that makes you real. And when I pull off this helmet, now there's a different reality and a different existence to be a part of. Okay?
Yeah.
And that falls into the kind of the Buddhist idea of reincarnation, where, you can't look at things as separate. That tree is technically me at some point. I will animate that tree, part of who I am, even if it's just, if you look at the breath that I'm exhaling right now, right? Like there was a point made that, we all exhale a certain number of or a certain volume of air, which then circulates around the earth. So technically, the air that I'm breathing has been shared with people who lived 1,000 years ago.
Yeah.
right? And so that energy or whatever is kind of circulating throughout the earth, right? You look at the idea of space-time, where there's a well of space-time that the gravity is pulling us towards, and the idea that our energy could escape that doesn't really hold true to physics, right? So while our energy may just change form into something else, the idea that it dissipates and disappears and goes into nothingness, I don't know about that one, right? I feel like there's some way of pulling us back into the consciousness. And maybe that's just me. There's my theory of everything, everyone. So, thank you for joining us. What a great episode. And
no, that's fascinating. I think that's it's worth thinking about. Although I find some of the stuff that you said disturbing, but that's okay.
Yeah. And that's the other problem is I think a lot of this, the immortality problem comes down to a lot of people are disturbed by a lot of what they see. And so they look at the idea that would go away in the future as, right, not necessarily possible. So again, I look at the optimistic view. I think we're getting better as we go. I really do.
If we're able to effectively eradicate actually, let's be more realistic. Let's not say fully eradicate death. Like we could treat death as a disease, right? But let's say we're able to so greatly increase the average human lifespan. Let's say if you could live to 500 or something like that, right? And be healthy. And what if we did create the ability to transfer a consciousness into a simulated reality where you wouldn't be able to tell the difference? That's going to make a lot of people that believe in religion really upset. I mean, that's going to shatter world beliefs.
Well, when the Pope downloads himself into a USB drive, that's when things will really...
I don't think that would be reliable.
What do you mean? You don't want the Pope on a USB drive? You can just have the Pope anywhere, right? I mean...
But you're right. The idea of being able to essentially create our own afterlife, which we would do by downloading consciousness, that flies in the face of all religion just now.
Yeah. Well, again, that becomes the question of, is that you or is that a different version of you, right? Like, again, if you're making a copy of you, that becomes a divergent you at that point, right? And so technically not...
Well, I guess it's the same as like cloning theory, which, basing this only off of sci-fi clearly, but, you can have multiple clones that will end up completely different from each other.
Yeah. Well, and it's, you even look at what they used to call multiple personality disorder, right? And they actually have done brain scans on people. So there was one particular patient who had a personality who was blind. And they did brain scans on her, and they found that when that personality was in control, she was literally blind. It cut off the brain's connection to her eyes. So her consciousness was telling her eyes that they didn't work anymore. Right? And the idea that, she apparently had, I think, 17 to 20 different consciousnesses, inside of her head. So the idea that you're just you inside of here is also kind of a questionable thing, right? The idea that there might be multiple yous inside your own head is actually a kind of a scientific theory right now, where they're actually
I think you could still arguably be you, but what that brings up is then we may have the ability to alter perceptions within ourselves.
Yes.
Right?
Exactly.
So 17 different personalities, it's just 17 different perceptions within your own brain, but it's all arguably still you.
Yeah. But that's where, if you're trying to take a scan of that, which personality are you taking? Right? And so that's where, are you taking a scan of the entirety of what's going on inside a head and assuming that that's one consciousness? Or are we taking a picture of that and assuming that there might be multiple consciousnesses born out of that? And it just depends on the experiences that it's having as to which consciousness is active at any one time. That's where, the difference between the subconscious and the conscious, they're just starting to kind of piece together how much of what we are is driven by these subconscious things that we have no technical control over, that just kind of happen, and we have this bubbling up of conscious thought, which makes us feel.
We really still have no bloody idea how our brains work. Right?
Yeah, I mean,
right? Yeah,
do we?
yeah.
Not even close.
Also, the concept of not consciousness, but the idea of being sentient, being self-aware, which there aren't that many creatures on the planet
that's becoming more of an issue as well. Yeah.
Well, that
they're
we
actually
know
finding
of.
that, like, they up until, what was it, 60, 50 years ago, we didn't think that animals felt pain.
Well, that's just silly.
That's how stupid we are.
Yeah.
That we thought that you could kick a dog and that it didn't feel anything. Like that's why animal testing has been a thing. That's why we've been doing this to the animals, is because we haven't believed that they were worth caring about.
Right.
Which just
that's awful.
You know,
obviously.
It's but it's this ongoing evolution of our thought process that now we recognize that these animals, and the idea that they don't care about each other, or they don't have feelings, they don't have communities that they're building, is lunacy. Right? And the fact that, we haven't been preserving them and studying them and trying to understand their version of intelligence as just as much of a acceptable version of intelligence as ours is, and that we've kind of put them as these secondary creatures that we had dominance over. That's unfortunately kind of the side effect of this whole religion thing, is that God gave us dominance over the plants and the animals and told us to go do whatever the fuck we wanted to them. Really, that's part of the Bible.
I remember that verse. Yeah. Go forth and do whatever the fuck you want.
But God gave us these plants and animals to do with as we will. And I just go, what?
Well,
so why is our will killing and maiming and destroying and right? Like a million species are supposed to go extinct in the next 20 years.
Evidence shows that we generally are not taking care of our environment. I think that's pretty well known by now.
I watch people, like, I drive and I watch people throw stuff out their windows.
Oh God.
I'm still just,
I've never
just
seen
aghast.
that. I've never seen that.
Cigarette butts out the window.
Right.
What? I can't even wrap my mind around that kind of ignorance, that you don't even think that little tiny, even just little piece of trash is a part of you, that you're just taught, and you just don't even think about the implications of what that means for your existence here.
There are certain other countries where if you throw any garbage on the ground, you're getting a fine.
Here. It's a law here. If I had my GoPro
but it doesn't get enforced.
It's a $2,000 littering fine.
Okay.
Realistically.
Well, yeah, if you're caught, I suppose.
Right, depending on what you're. Yeah. Well, that's where, again, if I had my GoPro going, I could just start reporting people. But
yeah,
I don't feel like that's where we need to be. That's the issue. I don't think surveillance state is the way to go.
No, absolutely not.
And that kind of brings us back to this immortality issue, right? Like, if people were to live for 1,000 years, can you imagine the kind of crap that would be caught on all this surveillance? Like, there's no way that anyone would, right? Like, you go back to Black Mirror, right, with the social score.
Yeah,
that everybody had. Like, if you live to be 1,000, there's no way you could have any kind of right, like.
Yeah, I mean,
let alone that everything you did 100 years ago is now coming up as, oh, we don't do that anymore. Now we're canceling you. What? Wait, what? Like,
so, the other problem with crowding and overpopulation too is look at all the waste that we create as human beings, right? I mean, we're struggling to deal with where are we putting our garbage? We can't possibly recycle everything. So we need to come up. It also
goes back to how we're producing things.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's
there's no reason why we couldn't produce things that are sustainable. Why do we still need plastic?
Yeah, that's
right. There's no real reason for it besides profit. Right. So
it's easier said than done, though. That's easier said than done.
It just costs a bit more money.
Well, I mean, lots of companies create products with plastic that's recycled and things that have, and even metal too that has been recycled. So that more and more companies are doing that type of stuff.
Okay, and why are they doing that? Is it because the company decided to do that, or is it because we pushed them to do it?
Well, there's always a bit of both.
I'm pretty sure those companies would have happily just kept on churning out all of this garbage if we hadn't have said something about it.
Oh,
and that's
cheaper.
Kind of exactly. And that's my issue with it, right? Is that the only people who are going to drive this change is us. right? We have to be the ones that are having these conversations and really looking at, like, even the whole idea of recycling was thought up by these companies to push it back onto us so that they could continue manufacturing things. And then it was on us. Why aren't you guys recycling? Right? Like, you know, and that's been the issue all along. It's this disingenuous campaign of making us the problem instead of them. You know, and that's kind of where I feel this conversation is, you know, it gets flipped on its head because we have no filter to be able to see where these ads are coming from. It doesn't say directly paid for by Coca-Cola. Yeah. So you can't see this food and beverage association as tied to these big corporations. Right. And unless you can, you know, really figure out that, oh, wait, it's this company telling me this.
Yeah.
Right. Not for my best interests, but for theirs. Right. Until we can learn to start to see some of that stuff, it's going to be an issue going forward. Right. Where, you know, we now think that we're the problem.
Well, definitely. And a lot of it's global poverty as well, right? And I say that, you know, even us as a developed nation, we are still in poverty, right? Yep. We just think of it differently. We're like, oh, no, we're not starving and everything. But almost every one of us is in massive amounts of debt, right? That's poverty, right? We still have a roof over our heads, might have a car, we can feed ourselves, everything, but we're poor.
How many kids go to school hungry?
Absolutely. And then you have products that are developed that are not good for the environment, that are not sustainable, but they're cheaper, right? I argue everybody would make the right decision if they could afford it, right? Yep. So that's what needs to be flipped. So it does start with us being the consumers. We're the ones that drive that forward. But if you just don't have the means to be able to do it, that's why it's created the problem it has.
I was reading an article about plastics, and I can't remember what country it was, but there was a push to make like soaps and conditioners and such available. And so they put them in these single serve packets, which were really, 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 really cheap. Right. But then the problem was now the wind is picking up these clouds of these little single serve plastic pieces and spraying them all over the place because that was the thing that was available, but it wasn't necessarily the best option for what we should have been doing.
Yeah.
Right. And so, like you said, with the profit thing, unfortunately, the profit thing doesn't necessarily mean that's the best way of doing things. It just means it's the most profitable. Of course.
Which means it needs to start at the top. Right. Yeah. There's absolutely no reason you can't just make a sweeping law saying plastic is now illegal. Right. There are alternatives. It's not like we don't have anything else. Right. Just force it. But that's where it does have to start, unfortunately.
Well, I mean, like I said, easier said than done, too. I think
we're heading that way, at least.
I think building products with plastic that's being recycled is the obviously the bare minimum too. But what do you replace plastic with?
Well, we'll figure that out. I mean, I'm sure there's probably multiple options already. Right? Or plastics that at least are more organic and biodegradable. That certainly exists.
And that's the thing. Like, we need to start looking at those options because even the recycling thing, I mean, you know, they've put trackers on a lot of these recycled materials and found them ending up in land, you know, trash heaps, basically. Thinking land masses, but that wasn't the word.
I remember reading
something shocking like the human body.
Do you guys remember reading an article? This was a number of years back about a university student. Maybe I don't remember if it was one university student or a group of university students that were able to create a plastic. It wasn't plastic. It was a excuse me, a water bottle that was made out of plant. Well, I think we brought up a lot of very thought-provoking arguments, obviously things that we will need to continue to think about. It's not these are all questions and problems that we won't be able to solve in just one episode, unfortunately.
As we always say, the conversation doesn't end here.
Anyways, why don't we just end right there before I die? Speaking of immortality, if you could, dear scientists of the world, if you could speed it up a little bit, that would be great. Because I'm losing my voice here.
Be immortal tomorrow,
and I need my voice.
Yeah, exactly. How are we supposed to do a podcast without your voice?
Yeah,
mellifluous tones.
Yeah. Any final thoughts that either of you want to add before we...
You're an asshole. Oh, wait, sorry. Inside thoughts. Right, sorry. I don't mean that at all. You're awesome.
Okay. I'm glad that wasn't directed at me.
It was just a general throw out there.
Right. Well, you know,
Quit being such an asshole.
We're all assholes to varying degrees, right? Well, thank you very much for watching. If you would prefer to subscribe to audio versions of this podcast, we're available in Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, TuneIn and Stitcher and Spotify, wherever you find podcasts. Just make sure you hit subscribe to ensure you get every single episode each and every week. Video is available, of course, on YouTube. Just search for the Subvert podcast and you'll find us pretty easily. All right, that's all for this week. We'll see you next time.